answer. Can we
Yeah,
go to the
beautiful
police?
answer.
Can we go to the police, because this happened and got covered up by the George Floyd trial, and it was covered up in the news cycle because it happened on the same day. But it's been kind of huge, this brewing over the last week here. Just to kind of give you the just the cliff notes. This was the picture from Charleston last week, and these peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters came out, and they applied for a permit multiple times, and they were denied their permits. And this group and their leader have no arrest records, nothing in their criminal background check history that would make them flagged to not get approved for a permit. And as libertarians, we don't believe that you should be need permission from government to exercise a natural right
to peacefully assemble. No.
So let me tell you what happened. So listen to this. So they go out there and they're peaceful. There's about 200 of them. They go out there and they're marching around, and the police say, okay, you can't be out here. They say, okay, we're out here anyway. Then they were complying with all the orders, complying, and they were marching to a point, and the police kind of set up this confrontation thing where they were kind of all like blocking off King Street. Yeah. And there you go, linchpin. And so then the protesters are being nonviolent, and here's the part that I want your take on. They go over the loudspeaker after 2 or 3 minutes and say, if you're not dispersed in 5 minutes, you are now an unlawful assembly, and we will literally arrest every single one of you. And they're in the riot gear, as I can show you right here. Yeah. So this is hard for me, Spike, because, and this is kind of, I've been kind of leading up to this whole time.
Did we lose him?
You were leading up to it, and then we lost you. I think you're back.
Am I good now?
Yeah.
So the point I'm getting to is what are your thoughts on, but real quick, the unlawful assembly thing, and then secondly, 3 days later, this is the kicker. 3 days later, the Black Lives Matter activists did a press conference, and after meeting with the police department to tell them about their concerns, immediately following the press conference, SWAT teams came and stopped the 2 Black Lives Matter organizers, and they threw them in jail. Made them pay $1,400 in bond for unlawful assembly 3 days after the unlawful assembly had happened, and after they actually had met with the police chief to talk about what had happened. So, because they went to a press conference, that means you have to lock them in a cage for committing a nonviolent crime. So what are your thoughts on the linchpins? Obviously, you were going somewhere there. And then what are your thoughts on having permits to be able to peaceably assemble? And then lastly, a 3-part question, conservatives that talk about that they're for limited, say to those conservatives who say, comply or die, they should have got a permit, they should have listened to the government. What do you say to those conservatives?
So let's talk about that last part first, because this is the Republican hypocrisy that exists. And it is a cognitive dissonance that is part of the hypocrisy that keeps the good cop, bad cop routine between the Republicans and Democrats going. Republican politicians and pundits talk often correctly about the fact that an out of control government is an infringement on our lives and rights and property. But then when they are presented with actual real life examples of that out of control government being an infringement on the lives and rights and property of the people, they say, well, you need to comply with those orders, and we need to back the blue, and they are the thin blue line that's protecting us from the savages who want to destroy everything. Okay, there's the hypocrisy there. How can you fight against the tyranny? The Second Amendment was never meant for hunting, and we need to refresh the tree of liberty, but you got to comply with the police, even if they give you an unlawful order that violates your rights. Now, that's the hypocrisy of the Republicans. The hypocrisy of the Democrats is that they acknowledge, even though they don't do anything about it, they acknowledge the times when an out of control government is protecting, at least when the police are doing it, attacking the lives and rights and property of the people. Again, they don't do anything about it either. But they refuse to acknowledge that that is the enforcement arm of all of the laws and regulations and mandates and taxes and everything else that they support, because they won't acknowledge the fact that government, when it gets out of control, infringes upon the lives and rights and property of the people. The reason they do this hypocrisy is A, to keep everyone confused, and B, so that they can constantly accuse each other correctly of being hypocrites. And then you have to figure out which hypocrisy sounds more agreeable to you. Do I want to back the blue even though I support fighting against an out of control government, or do I want government to take care of me and tell me what to do even though I don't think they should actually do that? It leaves voters having to choose which set of cognitive dissonance they want to put in their brain holes and constantly fight each other against ad nauseum, which, by the way, is why I love doing these panels on, Kennedy or Russia Today, or, any other, some of these long form panels that I do on podcasts and things like that, where they put me in between a Republican and a Democrat, and I let them go at it for a little bit. And then I step in and go, here's where you're both wrong and why you both sound ridiculous. And what ends up happening in every single one of those, incidentally, is one of them eventually says, you know what, it's going to be way easier if I just agree with everything he says. And then the other one, I start leaving that one alone. I'll jab at that person occasionally just to remind them that they're wrong too. But then the other one just begins to kind of shut down emotionally and just start rolling their eyes at everything I say, because they don't have a good rebuttal, because all they know how to do is argue with their counterpart over here, and they have no actual logical rebuttals to what I'm saying. And so they just kind of shut down, and they become my punching bag for the next 3 minutes to an hour, however long the panel is. And
it did. I saw the eye roll too. Last week.
That's not the first eye roll. That happens almost every time. And in fact, the other guy that was laughing in the previous thing where we were talking about immigration and drugs, he was the one who did the eye roll, because I backed him into a corner with, how can you be a conservative and support the war on drugs, which is helping the CIA plan clandestine operations across the country using narco terror groups? And he just kind of shut down. And the other one was agreeing. So that's how that worked. So Charleston. Part of the reason that South Carolina in general and Charleston in particular have such strong restrictions on the right to peacefully assemble is because when I forget if it was the G8 or G20, one of the G meetings happened in Charleston back in 2000 something. I think I want to say 2008, 2006, 2005, something like that. Because they were afraid that the anarchists were going to come in and burn everything down, that they passed all these rules, which are blatantly unconstitutional, but just haven't been successfully challenged yet, that say that you have to, every single person that attends your event has to take a background check and pay a deposit on any damage that might be done before they be allowed to enter the state.
Oh my gosh.
In other words, if you want to have a rally here, you just have to do it illegally. If you're not associated with the Republican Party or the Democrat Party or the Fraternal Order of Police or some, group that they aren't worried about, like the Rotary Club or the Shriners or something, you ain't having a rally here. They're going to declare it potentially unsafe, and it is not going to happen. So you just have to do it illegally, which means that thing allows them to selectively enforce what they're okay with or not. Any of the events I did in South Carolina, I was only able to do the one in Columbia, and anything I've done since then, I didn't ask any permission. We just did it. And for whatever reason, they, in those moments, didn't feel the need to stop us from doing it. They obviously felt the need to stop these Black Lives Matter protesters. Now, the next part of that.
Why? But why? Why stop peaceful protesters and call them an unlawful assembly? Why does the disconnect happen? You did answer, but with conservatives who are supposed to be limiting government, how can you better, or how can I better essentially point out that hypocrisy and help them get the wheels turning to say, hey, this is the state that you're talking about that's getting too big when you refer to the Second Amendment. Why can't you apply that same logic to when it comes to these young Black kings who had their First Amendment rights infringed on?
Right. The problem is when you're talking to a conservative about Black Lives Matter, you're having to work through the filter of everything they've been told that Black Lives Matter is. And so they will point at individual examples of a person looting a store or rioting or burning something down. And that gets, every one of the tens of millions of people that are associated with the Black Lives Matter movement in some way, large or small, is suddenly part of that. They're wanting to burn. Yeah, they're responsible for it, or they want to do it themselves. you showed the photo of me with the Black Lives Matter and people, and there's also some Black Panthers there as well. So it's me, the Boog Boys, Black Lives Matter 757, and Black Panthers and the Huey P. Newton Gun Club, who had actually literally just left right before this. This is a photo that was taken about 30 minutes after I gave my speech. Right before that, at its peak, there were about 100 armed Black people there. Nothing was burned down.
That's amazing.
Nothing was burned down. Nothing was set on fire. Nothing was robbed or pillaged or looted or whatever. And I mean, they had the numbers to do pretty much whatever they wanted. And the police were very, 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 very far away, even though we were in the center of government. That building behind us is the Capitol building. And oh, you can't see the building there, but that fence there, the building that fence is protecting is the Capitol building. And the building behind the person taking the photo where I had just spoken was the Supreme Court. We're in the center of the capital of state government in Richmond, in Virginia. And there were no police to be found because you don't bring pepper spray and tear gas to a gunfight. There were 100 armed Black people there. So they didn't burn anything down. They didn't loot. They didn't pillage. The looting and pillaging comes from the linchpin. And here's what happens there. So when a peaceful protest happens and the police decide, no, wait, this isn't happening, they do the linchpin. They guide them all into a specific area and they surround them so that now the protesters have to immediately either break up, which is functionally impossible. When you put people in a corral and tell them, now everyone disperse. Disperse to where?
Where?
So okay, you got 30 seconds to disperse hundreds of people or thousands of people. You can't. So what ends up happening is here comes the tear gas, here comes the mass arrest, here comes all the bad stuff happening. And so if it's any kind of a sizable group, they immediately start getting tear gassed and pepper spray and everything else. That often breaks into riots because people that came to peacefully protest police brutality are now being brutalized by the police. At the same time, the sheer amount of police resources it takes to do that linchpin maneuver leaves the entire rest of the city unpoliced. And thanks to the war on guns in many of these cities, that means that the people there have no real effective ability to protect themselves from everyone else who goes, wait, the cops aren't here? Okay, well, I'm going to loot and pillage and steal then because I have an opportunity to. These aren't Black Lives Matter protesters. They're looters. They're pillagers. They're thieves. They're people that see an opportunity and take it. So the problem in both cases is that both the protesters and the homeowners and business owners are unarmed. So when I talk to conservatives, I say, you know what the problem is? Everyone's right to keep and bear arms is being infringed upon. If the protesters were armed, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be happening because you don't do that to a bunch of armed people, even accidentally. You kind of leave them alone because they're armed. And you leave business owners and homeowners alone. So if we simply just enforce the Second Amendment and end all these ridiculous restrictions on gun ownership, including the NFA, which was written by the NRA, all of the gun laws, not just the ones that you're uncomfortable with, but literally all of them, and be in full comport with the Second Amendment, then a lot of these problems go away.
And you know what? I've had a big problem with what you just said at the end. We've had, your typical corporatist Republicans that run our local county council here, and we got, over 1,400 people within a couple of week period to sign a petition saying, hey, we don't want to enforce federal gun laws here. We don't want to, and this was before Biden's big grab, and they're still sitting on it. They have a Republican majority, and so that helps me kind of articulate that message here locally. I do want to bring Joel in. I haven't meant to leave him out. Joel is